Welcome, Harvey Martin, to our Take Flyt podcast. Harvey's a friend of mine. We've known each other for, I think, about 10 years now, right, Harvey? I think we
Yeah.
met at a mutual friend's house.
Yeah.
I was cooking, you were eating.
Yeah.
I don't remember a lot about what we talked about that day, but I remember maybe a year after that, we met again at a hockey game. I think it was the Winter Classic. We were hanging
Oh
out.
my gosh.
You
Yeah.
remember that?
I do.
And we were I think we were up in the concourse. It was me and you and a few other guys, and it was a cold day. And I think I had a hot beverage drinking, and I was like right up here. And
Yeah.
I didn't know you that well. You go, keep that thing pretty high and tight to your mouth, don't you, Rye? I go, yeah, I guess I do. I guess I never noticed the fact that I keep my drinks like really close to where my lips are. That's ease of access. But I knew from that moment I'd like you because you have a great like sense of humor and you can rib someone you barely knew. And
Yeah.
lo and behold,
Uh,
we'd have a lot in common. From the
yeah.
healthy lifestyle, and me with
Yeah.
cooking, and you with your breath work and your
Yeah.
mental
Yeah.
um, sharpness that you apply your life to. And every time we meet up, our conversations naturally gravitate to
Yeah.
health, and whether it's the breath or what we're eating or sleep or kind of how to best optimize our well-being.
Hmm.
And we not only want it for ourselves, but you and I both, I think we like to share that with others.
Yeah.
And that, I think, maybe I'm not going to speak for you, but that brings a lot of purpose
Yeah.
to us, is
Hmm.
seeing not only what we've learned and put into practice, but also be able to share that with others and see them do the same and really
Hmm.
buy in and develop or bring that into their lifestyle and become that new person they maybe have been searching for. And so that's one thing I love about you, because we have that common interest just in the overall well-being of a human.
Yeah.
And now, with me doing the cooking and venturing into this new life with Take Flyt, and then you with what you've done, I wanted to make sure I invited you on here and
Yeah.
give you a chance to share your story, and of course where you're at today, but most importantly for the purpose of Take Flyt, kind of how you became who you became,
Sure.
and what went through your mind during those what we call take flight moments in life, where you're on your
Yeah.
path or on your journey and all of a sudden you took a different path because you believe that's where you were meant to go. And what I like a lot about you, and I can't say this for everybody, but you're a very curious person.
Hmm.
And when things happen to you, you don't just let them happen and move on. They happen, and then you want to know why,
Hmm.
and why did that happen, and how can I understand it and maybe change things so I can become a better person, and along the way help someone else. And that's what you've done in a multiple things since I've known you. You've had multiple roles that
Yeah.
you've helped yourself and others. And that's what I really think purpose is about, is not only being a little bit selfish, so you have the drive to do it, but also selfless and being able to help others. And I think that's really great. So I wanted to say that first off
Yeah.
before you got into
I
telling your
really
story.
appreciate that. Yeah. That's
Because
beautiful.
that's, like I said before, I think I told you a few weeks ago when I was thinking about people to have on Take Flyt, you're one of the first people that came to mind because of all the things that you've accomplished and just kind of your authentic nature and kind of how you go about your life in the curious way. So maybe talk a little bit about where you're at today, who you are
Hmm.
today, and
Sure.
then we'll get into taking a step back and digging into
The
kind of how
past.
you became who you became.
Perfect. Yeah. I mean, simple to talk about right now. Obviously, I just finished my fourth year. I was coaching. I was a human performance coach with the San Francisco Giants. I finished that 4 years with them. And now I'm sort of independently working and starting a business, kind of re-upping what I was doing before I was with the Giants. And before I was with the Giants, I was running a company called the Mind Strong Project, which is a lot of stuff that you just talked about. Obviously, as a human performance coach, I was doing the same things as I was doing when I was running a company. Now it's this, as I was listening to you talk, which I greatly appreciate, those words are very kind. I think that it's ironic because in the current moment that I'm in, I'm currently shedding layers of my past 10 years of teaching and things that I've discovered or learned or used. And I'm feeling called to something different. And I'm not necessarily sure what that different is yet, which we can probably talk about curiosity and how to follow some of those things. But I will say that I have a similar feeling that I've had in many times in my life where you have to, in your words, take flight. And I think when you are taking flight in unknowns, it can be really scary, but then that ultimately, as we know and learn through time and develop our own wisdom, that turns out to be something beautiful. So without talking so abstract about what I'm currently doing, is I currently am in the process of still running a company where I'm a human performance consultant specifically for professional athletes. I work with a few musicians, artists, if you will, and a couple entrepreneurial CEO type people. But a lot of my work is in the artist athlete realm. And we can talk a little bit about that, but that would be more tangible what I do professionally. And then I just came off publishing my second book, Without Words, which came out, what day is it? December 16th, so a little over a month ago. And I actually wildly just started my third book, which is coming along pretty seamlessly. I'm going to keep the title under wraps, and it's not going to come out for probably, we'll see. I'm not going to put a deadline on it. Maybe a year from now, I would release this one, which will kind of be a segue off of Without Words of what I just wrote, Mastering the Art of Being. But I would say, if I could sum it up really briefly, what I'm doing in the moment is I'm performance coaching, like I've done for many years, and I've really taken a lot of, I don't know the word necessarily of love and passion, but I've taken it very serious in a professional career of being an author in the last 4 years. And I've pursued that path heavily. And then I just relaunched my podcast, A Moment with Mark, which will be actually my fourth evolution of podcasting I've done. This will be my fourth show that I've produced. So I guess we go performance coach, writer / author, and podcaster.
So there it is. That exactly is what I was talking about. Is I've known you 10 years, and you've done a lot with your life in 10 years than many people can say, a lot more than people can say. And I think just that's your curiosity and your evolution. And I always wanted to, it's like the growth mindset, right? You're always wanting to shape your mind and test new avenues and kind of see what brings you curiosity and challenge yourself. And you've done 4 podcasts. You can probably give me a lot of tips on what I'm doing here as we go. But this is my first episode of my first podcast. So
there you go. I'm honored to be here.
That is awesome. That's very cool. Well, so let's go back in time then.
Yeah.
Now that you've laid the groundwork for where you're at today, is there a moment? I know you've had multiple Take Flyt moments in your life, but is there one that maybe early on that really you remember as this? Looking back, wow, that was a big critical moment in my life that I chose to go down that path.
Yeah, I think the biggest moment, and our mutual friend that we met, I love that you bring up those past memories, but I think that's really relevant. And I'll highlight this moment in 2015 on Lake Minnetonka, because this was kind of when I was leaving the life of I was a professional baseball player till 2015. I got released right before, I can't remember, probably June-ish, right before the draft in 2015. I was 25. It was right before my 26th birthday, which I'll be 36 this summer. So it's coming up on 10. It'll be 10 years specifically from which I was done playing as an athlete. And I think I highlight this one regularly because when I was playing, I got released my last year with the Yips, which is a performance anxiety. And essentially, I just kind of froze up in game, and I wasn't able to perform physically. And it was really deemed, which it is, but it was deemed solely as like a mental health issue or obviously anxiety. And it kind of led into like a hypo-aroused state, which was like a low depressive type state, which clearly is going to be in the realm of mental health or mental performance, mental skills, which I had been studying sports psychology and mental skills in college, which is what made this incredibly ironic to me. But where I'm going with this is that I moved to Minnesota. I was in a position where I was done playing and I had anxiety and I had options to kind of go. I don't remember exactly the plan, but it was like I had a lot of stuff offered to me that was medicine. You know, I was able to take medicines or certain treatments and stuff. And I just did not, for whatever reason, I didn't want to do that. I wanted to holistically try to heal myself for whatever I thought that was at the time. I just felt like I could overcome the things that I was feeling. And again, I had no idea what that meant. I just wanted to try to discover who I was. So I started doing breath work with a friend of mine in Minneapolis in October, September-ish. I kind of was nervous to ask somebody to do this because when you're in your mid-20s with a bunch of ball players, people are just doing meditation in the mornings. And so I started doing that, and his partner did sound bowls and meditation, and she'd make me tea, and you'd been there. You'd been to that house with that.
Yep, I
Remember that
remember
old
that.
red sauna? Yeah.
Yeah, you led us through some breath protocol
Breathwork.
stuff. Yep.
Yeah. So you've been there. So you know the space. I was going there and I was learning breathing and I was learning about nature and our connection and all these things. And again, I had no incentive to have a job or a career or tell you what I do now, or I was going to write these books. I was literally just trying to heal myself. But that I did, I can't remember exactly. It was along the lines of 16 weeks of dedicated breath work. I did it every day, paired it with cold exposure, non-negotiable, right when I woke up in the morning. And in that winter, in December of 2015, I swam in Lake Minnetonka. And I did from my memory, I did 5 minutes of still water swimming, no heat source, no sauna, no hot tub, essentially. And then I came out and I felt so crazy alive that I went back in for like another 2 minutes.
Hmm.
And I came out of that water and I sat on the snow on a towel, obviously. And I just sort of sat there in my bathing suit in the dead of winter. Obviously, I don't live in Minnesota, but people who are you're in Minnesota, people who live in Minnesota, it's the coldest place ever.
That's
And
right.
I just sort of I was in so I consider it a moment in which I in my material side of life it was one of the moments in which I felt like I had met God. I had felt a presence on me from nature and the purity of being in such extreme cold with the fear of like potentially dying in my mind at the time. I know the safety of these things now, but at the time I did not. So it was like it was matched with this extreme fear of potential death in this enlightening moment of what was that experience I just had of presence. And I can't sum it up to another thing of God to make it, I guess, relatable for us to communicate on. And so that really sparked me because in a short version of it, what it taught me about health and holistic health is that most of our psychology is driven, if not all of our psychology is driven through our physiology. So meaning our physiological internal functioning, our processes that are happening unconsciously is typically dictating the way in which we think. And so it rewired my perspective on thinking and mental health. And it flipped everything that I was doing on its head because it was no longer about doing more self-talk or talking myself through this or talk therapy or these sort of interventions. It was more get my internal functionality appropriately sound and healthy, starting with the breathing, because then my physiology would align and my nervous system would align. And if I could create a healthy nervous system, I would create this container where I think that you expand your emotional sustainability, your behavioral control, all that stuff. And I think that that's when anxieties start to leave you and you start to feel more alive. And that feeling was so profound to me. And I was in a really unique position. You know, I was in my mid 20s. I was living in my buddy's closet. If you remember Steve McGuigan, I lived in his closet for a year and a half. I didn't make any money. I had to, I had nowhere to go. So I had all these optionalities and I was thinking to myself, well, what am I going to do? Like, it's not like I'm in a rush, so I'm gonna discover what that feeling was. And I did that for about 2 to 3 years. And people helped me and people got me in touch with people. And I obviously had somewhat of a Rolodex of professional athletes who were connected to doctors and connected to trainers. And so I kind of strategized what was in my immediate circle, what I could do for free, which is why I started podcasting, because I used podcasting as free education. I marketed the pro athletes that I knew to doctors and people of status because I knew status would bring status. So I found ways to creatively get inside rooms where I could ask questions. And yeah, from 2015 to 2018, most important to me, now this is going to sound successfully material for sure. This is what's going to come out of this. But what is most important to me is that I recovered and I healed and I didn't take any medication or anything artificial to kind of rewire my nervous system. I did that naturally. By 2018, I had a pro athlete come to me and ask me to train him. And I did breath work with him and cold exposure with him, started taking people to that house in Minnesota. I worked for free for many years. And then in 2019, I got paid for the first time. In 2020, I had a full-time job. In 2021, the Giants hired me as a consultant and my company kind of took off and the rest was history. I had a professional career.
Wow. That is really incredible. So from 2015 to 2015 to 2018, did you have any income source?
I worked 5 different jobs. I worked at an all-female gym, which was
Yeah.
I was a personal trainer there in the mornings.
There you go.
Yep. And then I taught high school baseball, youth and high school baseball. I was a
Okay.
pitching coach. And then I coached at Augsburg University. I was a catching coach at Augsburg. And
Hmm.
then I was a part-time scout, amateur and professional for the Milwaukee Brewers. And then I helped scout Prep Baseball Report, which I know still exists. I don't know if it's down here. I know I think it's pretty popular still. I did, however that worked, I made money off of those jobs.
Good. Yeah. Well, I wanted to make sure we highlighted that because I think it's important for people to know that you're finding ways to kind of stay alive and bring money in despite maybe not having the most glamorous job. You had a plan.
Yeah.
You knew you wanted to be somewhere at some point, and it was always in your mind along the way that you were going to get there. You needed to kind of keep yourself afloat in the meantime, still doing stuff you enjoyed. I mean, I know baseball is a big part of your life and your
Right.
background, so that was, I'm sure, was bringing you joy and fulfillment to teach and to coach. But
Yeah.
then when you finally got that call in the 2018,
Yeah. Right around there is when
2018,
pro athletes started to come to me for training.
yeah, and that's when you knew that what you had to teach was something that people wanted to learn. It was actually
Yeah.
something that you could create
Yeah.
a business out of. And it sounds like from that point, you're off and running at that point, right?
Yeah, I mean, I would say I battled. Ironically, one of the things that really made me financially successful and entrepreneurially successful was COVID, because I really was still I was still grinding away all the way up till COVID. And I
Mm-hmm.
actually, ironically, I left all my jobs in November. I remember these exact dates. I left November 15th in 2019. I told all my job, I got rid of four of them, and I stayed with the pitching coach job at this high school facility, Mash Performance Match Baseball. Unbelievable
Yep.
people. I think,
Yep.
yeah, you know those guys.
Yep.
And so I stayed there. Their owners let me do hourly, so I picked the amount of hours I could to pay my rent and have a little bit of food for groceries every week. And I did that, and I was building my business on every hour imaginable. And I said to them that my March 15th I would leave because I was going to go full time on Mindstrong. And I left March 15th. My wife, but girlfriend at the time, woke up emotional on March 16th and told me that I wasn't going to go to work because there was a world pandemic and COVID had hit.
Yeah.
And that was actually my first day as a full blown business owner was COVID. Now, the irony of this was like all tons of fear, didn't have any income coming in. I was actually in some debt at the time, and we were struggling financially as a business, but we had a brand, and I had been helping professional athletes. And what really was crazy ironic, another moment, I don't know how these happened, but all pro athletes couldn't go to work. And so what happened was I had a relevant brand. I had done like 100 podcasts or so with multiple professional athletes across multiple industries. And people started DMing me, and they were all pro athletes, and they weren't in spring training. They weren't with their teams, and they wanted someone that could coach remotely. And I landed some pretty high end clients that first couple of months, and that changed my life like drastically. And that happened so quick. And then, like I said, that next fall, the Giants interviewed me to be their human performance coach.
It's incredible, isn't it? Like you just
Yeah.
don't know. When you were doing those podcasts, you were
Hmm.
doing them because you genuinely love to do it and you're curious and you love to have the conversation. But you didn't know where that was going. You
Mm-mm.
didn't know COVID is coming. But what was happening without you knowing it was you were creating these relationships and people were speaking about it and telling others. And so when that moment did hit, people knew of you and
Yeah.
you all of a sudden became a person people wanted to come to
Hmm.
because you had the interest, you had the knowledge, you had those things you wanted to teach. And like I said, you just never know down the road who you're going to connect with or reconnect with.
Right.
And I think it's just that's why I love relationships and meeting new people because you can help them, they can help you. You just never know down the road where you're gonna reconnect and maybe make an impact somewhere you never would have thought you would. And
Yeah. It's
for
wild.
you to end up in the Giants, talk a little bit about that, how the whole
Sure.
because I've heard you talk about it before, how getting knocked out of baseball and then coming
Yeah.
back into it.
Well, I think the interesting thing about being a coach in the big leagues and coming in a unique role, because to my knowledge, there wasn't a role in that, and I don't think there is still in Major League Baseball that's a human performance coach. I could be wrong on that. That's largely people have told me that most of the time. So I think that's slightly accurate. But, it was interesting because I played minor league baseball and then I scouted a little bit for the Milwaukee Brewers for about 4 or 5 years, I don't remember, maybe 5 or 6 years. Point is, I was kind of in this minor league realm for like a total of 7 or 8 years, right? And I bet my uncle played in the big leagues. I had many people who played professional baseball that I'm close with. It's not like it was like rare for me to be around a pro athlete. What was weird about it was I never coached in the minor leagues, and I didn't have really, I guess, accredited credentials in those positions that are in certain scenarios or medical staffs in major league sports. And I was 31 years old, and that was a pretty old team in 2021 with some legends on the team. I mean, Buster Posey, who's now the president of the Giants, was there. Brandon Crawford, who I just had on a podcast, a bunch of these guys who were older than me. So I say the situation that was so unique to me is that I was younger than a lot of the players. I didn't have any minor league coaching experience, and I really kind of curated a lot of my work off of exploration and experience. And I was an entrepreneur. I was sort of just like rambling around for all these years. So to be dumped into this $1 billion industry with major departments of people and iconic features of characters, they're superheroes. Pro athletes are superheroes in America. And these sort of things. That experience did more for me, I think, in my personal development than any of my actual craft. I obviously learned a lot about people and human performance and got to see things up close and personal for the last couple of years. And I think it's definitely infiltrated my perspective. And it's 1000% made me a better teacher and a better coach. But it's interesting because I said this to a couple of guys who are in the big leagues last night that I now work with as clients, but we were in the sauna and I said to them, I was like, the irony of the big leagues for me was I went into the big leagues with this ego-driven desire to change baseball. I wanted to make baseball this holistic industry. I wanted the medical industry to be holistic because, as I told you, my story of change was holistic. It was met through a God presence and innate breath and cold and all stuff. So when you change so much like that, you just inevitably feel like you need to share with everybody. And I was so driven to share it that nothing was going to get in my way. I had such blinders. The blinders, in a short version, ended up crushing me when I first got there, because now I'm in this environment where I couldn't see things or get outside of my own lane of how much I wanted the game to change. And going back to the story I told the guys last night, after 4 years of it, all the game did was change me. It just made me tighten my game up. It made me professionalize myself. It made me learn how to speak clear. I got sober. I've been sober for a while, for almost 2 years this March. Yeah. And just like a lot of things that really pulled out of me it's a fascinating thing. I know people won't, it's hard to explain in a short version of it, but largely what happened to me in that scenario was I went in to change it and all it did was change me, because I learned how hard performances and how hard it was just a bigger world. And I saw how difficult it is to be healthy in society and how difficult it is to perform in entertainment industries and supply entertainment for millions of people. And I learned such compassion for people and humanity and things that are exposed publicly. It really flipped me on my head. Like, I don't know how much work I did, but it did a lot of work on me.
That's great. Well, it's great you recognize that too, because that's, I'm sure you went into it, your eyes were wide open and you're willing to do whatever, but also you want to make an impact too. And into 4 years later to have things kind of shift a little bit and to have you be kind of like, wow, this is how this all works, huh?
Yeah. Well, I think if I can highlight your word impact, if I may, to think about this thought. And the book I just wrote is Without Words. And that book is a product of the 4 years in Major League Sports, because like I said, I went there to try to change everything. I wanted it to entirely change. And I felt like I had the strength to do it, which I think is largely ego driven, which is fine. I'm not going to say that that's right or wrong. I think that all of us have those moments, and that's take flight in and of itself, like being able to have a vision of something. And then I think you mentioned this earlier about curiosity and those sort of things. I think when you break yourself or you burn all the things that are unworthy of yourself, that's kind of the phoenix rising, right? Like you now have to go to the next thing. And I became so talented in the first 8 years of teaching that I had mastered my presentations, my material, and I was running them out. I was running them out. And then I got to this last year of baseball and going into spring training. And I was actually starting to think about what impact is, because it's like, well, are you going to spend your whole life educating the world and telling the world what's wrong with the world? Or to what degree do you just be the thing? Like, to what degree do you just do the breathing, or you just live obedient, or you live simple, or you do things that are along these processes that you teach? And it was a really weird thing to me to consider impact, because it's like I've learned in the health industry, it's really difficult, if not clear, almost impossible to change another person as a person. And it's like, how do I put somebody in their water? Like, how do I make you take
Yeah,
flight?
that's
You
right.
know?
Yeah,
And I think that becomes a really puzzling question as a teacher.
that's right. Yeah, that's interesting you say that, because when I started Take Flight, my whole goal wasn't to, have the answer.
Hmm.
But the goal of Take Flight is to spark the conversation. And if you spark the conversation and you have storytellers like you come on, that's when people start to self reflect a little bit, and they find their purpose on their own. And they'll
Hmm.
they'll know when they find it. It's gonna, like I talked about earlier, it'll bring, you'll have a sense of selfishness to it, because
Yeah.
you're gonna want to do it for yourself because you're driven to do it, but you're going to be doing it for others in an act of service. And when
Hmm.
you find both of those, that's a true moment of purpose.
Mm,
And,
that's
but I
beautiful.
think, yeah, I think you're right. It's like, you never know. You don't have the answer for everybody, and you can't make someone do something. The idea is have the conversation, get all the
Yeah.
stuff out, like you did with Mind Strong and what you've
Yeah.
done. It makes people curious, and people will listen. And the more you talk, the more people start to ask themselves the questions like, where's my life at? What am I doing? How can I spark purpose within myself? And that's just the evolution of life. The journey is long, and there's many paths that appear along the way, and
Hmm.
they all happen at different points for different people. So I think, when people talk about purpose, I think some people think purpose needs to be a forever thing. The
Right.
same purpose stays forever, but in reality, my purpose today could be different than my purpose 5 years from now. I don't know how long
Yeah.
Take Flight lasts, and where you're at, you might write 3 books and then go on to do something completely different that brings you purpose. And
Yeah.
that's the beauty of life. But I think people get hung up in like finding a purpose, and that's my purpose for life.
Yeah. Well, I think we want that because it gives us certainty and it takes away all the unknown. It takes the fear of the unknown. Because when you do drop something and move on to something, it's incredibly scary. And that's why I think naturally we're bounded by the structure of society to want to not take flight and seek convenience and comfort. I'm not saying that as I'm not involved in that. I think that's human nature. That's a generalized statement with me also involved in that generalization. And I think that we have moments where we go in and out of them, but because if I think of take flight moments in my life, I mean, I can tell you all of them on a podcast because there's like 10 of them. It's not like but I've lived thousands of days already.
That's right.
So in the grand scheme of things, I talked about the moment of 2015 as a pinnacle moment in my life. Well, that was 10 years ago. So I haven't had that pinnacle moment every day for 10 years. And I think that you have ebbs and flows of when you seek convenience and comfort. And I think that, but I also, with that said, I think that intuitively, if you can connect with your heart and follow your heart, there are times where you need to be comfortable and convenient and you need to take your foot off the gas and I need to coast here for a minute and I need to just create some order. And then I think just like all duality, then you have to create chaos and then you have to balance them and you got to keep climbing your ladders is how I've kind of come to understand it in my professional pursuits is like you can't stay in order too long because then that gets boring. You can't stay in chaos too long or you just start becoming too survival and you can't think properly. So in general, it's like, well, I need a healthy dose of chaos to create adaptation here and there. And that's usually these unknowns where I got to take flight. And then once I do take flight, now I got to sprinkle in order so that I can create the routines and habits. I can learn this new character, this new me now. And how do I balance that? But then eventually that balance, and I think that goes back to your point about purpose. We would love to just have that forever and just be like, okay, I'm good. I found order and chaos. I figured out how to balance it and I have my meaning and all's good. But eventually you have to get to the next layer, the next checkpoint. And that next checkpoint, it just runs itself back. I call it hide and seek. We play hide and seek with ourselves our entire lives.
I love that. That last 2 minutes there. It's really well said. I couldn't agree more with everything you just said there. I wanted to kind of shift gears here for a second.
Yeah.
And ask you, are there one or two people that come to mind that in your life you've drawn inspiration from?
Mm. Are there one or two people that I've drawn inspiration from? That's a pretty big question.
Thank you. It's my first podcast.
Yeah, there you go. I think it's yeah, I think that, well, as I've done this and I am somebody who pursues, when I draw inspiration from somebody, I try to get into the room with those people. And I've learned the valuable lessons of don't meet your heroes, because once you meet them, you no longer admire them as much. And I think that that's a harsh reality of life.
Yeah, you're right.
The two people that come to mind when you ask me about one or two who have really impacted me, the current two that stand out to me are Rick Rubin is one that I've never met, and another person is Darren Lean, who I've met and I'm friends with. And I use them both because they're in the public eye. They're in a celebrity ship. They live in the areas of the world that I love. I mean, Darren's up in Malibu. It's one of my favorite places in the world. I try to go there as often as possible. Cool pocket of people that really inspire me who live out there. But the reason why I say both of them is it's not them as the person, and I had already mentioned this about the heroes. It's not them as the person or the people. It's the things that I see in myself that they're doing. And I see that I have traits that they have that I admire, but it's not of them for being them. And believe I've told this to Darren. It's not like I put that on him because doesn't need to do anything for me. It's more of the fact that like I see things that he does and I feel like I can get that out of me. And knowing that that's been possible, that other humans have done that, I think is what, as I've gotten older, that's what I've found to admire more, rather than having like a singular person impact me, like this person changed my life or those things. There's tons of people who have changed you've helped change my life. There's multiple people who have done that for me. I think my perspective towards that question has changed in the framework in which I just answered it. I look at people and things that I admire about their gifts and their unique skills, and it's not them as a whole. It's minor, minimal things that I see in them that I just know are in me, and to know that it's possible physically and materially, that it's accomplishable, that I know I can get to those layers.
Yeah, that's a great answer. I know it was a loaded question. I put you on the spot with that one, but I know it. I asked everybody that question because I think it's important to reflect on it for one, but also to acknowledge those people, because I don't think anybody ever gets tired of hearing that they're an inspiration to somebody.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the greatest compliment I would think is to be an inspiration to someone, like genuine inspiration. And so I ask people that question so they can reflect on it, but also to give gratitude to the people that they do inspire or are inspired from. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
There's one question specifically I wanted to ask you, actually, because I was excited to have you on here. And it kind of gets to the point of what I was asking you earlier. And I phrased a question to you right at the very beginning. And it was, who are you in this moment? And I think a lot of times when we meet someone for the first time, like if you go to an event or a party and you meet someone and you or they ask you a question, the first question usually is, what do you do? If I ask you that question, and if I didn't know you, what do you think that I was trying to get out of the question? What do you do?
What do I think?
Harvey Martin, nice to meet you. What do you do?
Yeah. What do I think you're trying to get out of the question?
Yeah.
I think that naturally, I think that we have a hard time communicating in general. So I think it's an easy way to create sound and delay the process of communication. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think it's just the natural generalization of human behavior that we have to start at the surface. But I think beyond that surface, that it's a way to connect, right? I've thought about this ever since when I started traveling overseas. I started to learn that if I met an American in Europe, anywhere in America, I could be from Detroit, Michigan, which is where I grew up, and I could meet somebody from Seattle, Washington. And if I meet them in America, it's not as big of a deal as if I meet them in Europe. And instantly when I meet them in Europe, we have this bond, right? Because we have a connection. And I think I'm using that metaphor to answer your question because I think that's why we ask that. We ask, what do you do to start building the natural bond of connectivity of, am I going to like this person, trust this person? How far are we going to take this? And I think if your answer comes back naturally in the fact of, yeah, we're on the same wavelength, then you have the quick way out. Whereas if I were to say something to somebody, like I said, if I meet somebody in Finland from Seattle, instantly I'm in the sauna with them and I go, yeah, I'm from Detroit. I'm from Seattle. Oh, I've been to Seattle twice. I went to Leavenworth. Oh, I'm from Leavenworth. Oh my God. And so you see what I'm saying? It's like we create this comfortability in a foreign land. And I think that that's just an example that a lot of people can relate with that is relevant in the microcosms of how often you have that on a daily basis with people when you ask them that question. But I don't think it has much meaning to it other than just trying to decide in a very short moment on whether or not you're going to trust this person or not.
And then if I put emphasis on the word do, what is that? What does the do mean? And what do you do? What do you think people
Well,
are?
I love these questions. It's funny. I gotta get you my new book because the first question of my book, I wrote, "Who am I?" And I wrote an entire book off the fact that you cannot answer who you are.
Okay.
And
Yeah, I have
the
not read your book. That's funny. I will
yeah,
get a copy though.
yeah, the entire premise of that question is so fascinating to me because I think materially we have to tell people what we do because we can't make sense of anything else besides material, concrete answers, which is why I think people demand resumes. But ultimately, self perception wise, that you're none of those things. I know that I'm not my resume, but in order for you to hire me, I have to give you my resume. But even you who are going to hire me know that I'm not my resume, but you have to ask me for my resume. So it goes back to the surface level that I just don't think we can break. It's a trustworthy bond. So the reason why I'm going philosophical on that question of what do I do is because I know that what I do is made up and fabricated. And I've created material jobs out of it to be able to come on a podcast and go, I'm a performance coach and this is how many years I did it. And here's the 2 degrees I got. And here's the certifications I did. But if I tell you the truth of what I do, I don't know because how could I? I don't know the depths of what I do because I don't even know how to do it. I'm just out here trying to understand life and the world. And so, in the process of understanding more of myself, I have to make money to survive. So, I tell people what I do.
That's right. Yeah. And that's people ask the question, what do you do? And they want to know, what do you do for work? Right.
Yeah.
But do they really want to know? Are they really curious about what you do for work? Are they sizing you up to see what kind of status you have and how much money you make
Yeah.
and this and that? And I never feel like it's a genuine question when people ask, what do you do? It's just, like you
Yeah.
said, it's a kind of a space filler. It just kicks off a conversation and then people can kind of figure out where they're at compared to the
Yeah.
person they're talking to. But one of the reasons I've been thinking a lot about this recently is the, what do you do? And I feel like it kind of gets back to identity and like our identity
Mhm.
and how for many people, many generations, our work has become our identity,
Yeah.
and what we do is who we are.
Mhm.
And especially thinking back to like people that are at the retirement age now, like the
Mhm.
65, 75-year-olds, I feel like in that generation, what they did was who they were, who they are. And when you get to an age of 65 or retirement age and it's time to retire, you feel great and accomplished that you're retiring now, but you also you kind of lose your identity too a little
Yeah.
bit when that first day comes and you're at home and you're relaxing and I don't have to go to work. I don't have to report to this person. I don't have to turn in this assignment.
Right.
And so I started thinking, I was thinking a lot about that. And like, I wouldn't say I'm worried for the people retiring, not having an identity, but I think a lot about people today in their job and what they do and it becoming their identity. And it kind of ties into Take Flyt, into doing the things in life that you feel like you're meant to do and to bring you purpose and not feel like you have to be tied to something for the sole reason of, having a job or for the financial purpose of it. And I realized the financial piece it's tricky because everybody's in a different situation and you need money to live and to provide for the family. But to see people and to hear stories like yours and others that you were trying to find ways to bring money in, but you're also at the same time trying to find your purpose, and you're going down that journey. And you knew that if you could get to that point, everything would work out. But just it's kind of scraping by, loosely calling it scraping by, to get to that final moment where you took flight and you went off and did your thing, and you kind of created your own path. And now you have a different identity than maybe what you would have thought you would have had prior to
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, I think there's a great strength. I love that analogy of kind of the baby boomers, right? Like they kind of did the same assembly line finale. They started the process and ran its course for 40x years and have a hard time with that. I've seen that personally. I think you see a lot of that with athletes, and it's a similar vein with athletes. That's one of the things I really struggled with identity, because you got to think as an athlete, you start as a little boy. You start developing in your consciousness era of you identify with being a sport. You identify with that in class. You identify with that in the male skit. In my case, that's how I picked up my girlfriends. It's how I talked at the holidays. It's how my parents greeted me. I was this baseball player for 20 some years. And now all of a sudden, I tell athletes the hardest thing, that my first Thanksgiving was a real big eye awakening for me on what identity was, because I went to Thanksgiving at age 26 and people didn't know how to talk to me, because what was I doing? It was the first time in my life I wasn't preparing for a baseball season.
That's right.
And that's just things that you're doing. I would imagine that's the same when your kids go off to college and you become an empty nester as parents. Like, I think these are all little deaths that we have in our lives that we're not actually, it's our material character that's dying, and you got to grieve those deaths. And I think that I would imagine gets harder as you get older. I think that the thought to that, as in have had a material death with identity, I think there's a great strength in learning the ability to walk away from anything that you're doing. And I don't say that as a cop out or a way out or not to be all in. I think of it as just the ability to let go. And can you have faith in existence and thinking that you can be fully immersed and attached to this moment in your life? And your example being podcaster through Take Flyt. In this moment, can you be fully attached to being a podcast host to the highest degree of what you can comprehend that as? But also hold the courage and strength to detach from it and let it die if it needs to, and let it move on from it. And I think that sounds nice as a package like that, in the sense of having attachment and detachment, which is the classic yin and yang. I understand that. But I think that journey is actually so difficult. I think that's how we gather so much of our compassion for ourselves and then for other people, is that you can have compassion for people who are changing, trying to change, working on changing, moving through change, going through the stages, having all the uncertainties. And then you can feel that in yourself, and you can see that this was going to be scary. I have to change. I have to detach in this moment. I have to let go. I have to move forward. And then also knowing, like, you can still fully attach. And I think that's, if I can tie it a bow in a professional athlete, what I learned about 4 years of watching Major League Sports is that I thought it was really fascinating to watch athletes be the character and the identity in the reality TV show for fans, because fans can't see athletes as people, because it ruins their reality TV show. This is one of the reasons why it was so fascinating to watch people ask for autographs regularly. And these people play them on fantasy games and sports games, all these things, and they're talked about. But on the backside of that creates somewhat of an invisible prison for athletes, because they have the hardest time not being the character, because they're just immersed in it. They can't go to restaurants without being the character. And that's where I think that's so hard in sports. And I think I've had a front row seat to identity in psychology for a significant amount of time. And I don't think that's any different to your example of older generations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really good insight there from the athlete. I didn't think about the professional athletes always having to be on and be the character that the fans always sees. They don't see him as the person, and the athlete, they see him as the athlete all times.
Yeah.
So good. Hey, I wanted to wrap up here. I'm gonna throw 10 this or that questions at you. Rapid fire.
All right.
Okay. So first word that comes to your mind or applies to your life. All right. Ready?
All right. Let's do it.
Number 1, sauna or ice bath?
Sauna.
Barefoot on the grass or barefoot on the sand?
Wow. Barefoot on the grass.
Teacher or student?
Student.
Coffee or tea?
Wow. It has to be one or the other, huh?
Such a right answer.
Such a neutral, but I'm sticking with coffee.
Yeah, good answer. Back sleeper or side sleeper?
Start on back, but for the answer, side sleeper.
All right, we'll allow that. Reading or writing?
Wow, another one. This one's interchangeable. I'm gonna just tell you the truth because it depends on the phase I'm in life. Both are magical in their own sense. I'm gonna go with reading.
Michigan or Minnesota?
Oh man,
you're gonna upset a lot of people one way or the other.
Yeah, that one hurts. As much as I love Minnesota, and I do think it's one of the most beautiful states in the country and one of the most beautiful places in the world, all that glitter and love, it'll be precious to my heart. But
just cut to it.
Yeah, Michigan. Can't let the roots.
Okay. Desert or mountains?
The old proverb, not cutting to it now at this point. I'm just going to keep bugging you. The old proverb is the oceans for the body, the mountains are for the mind, and the deserts for the soul. So once again, it's kind of the reading and the writing aspect of depends on what time of year it is. I would say the soul is I'm going to go with the desert. I'm going to pick the soul.
Mm-hmm. All right. Back to baseball here.
Yeah.
Walk the winning run in or balk the winning run in?
Walk the winning run in.
Lastly, the breath or the mind?
The breath. That's an easy one.
There you go. Future politician Harvey Martin. Thank you. Good. Hey, one last, well, take as long as you want, but any words you could or would like to share to anybody that's thinking about a take flight moment of their own at this point in their life?
Oh, yeah. I would say that when it feels, you'll feel it. This is, again, my entire interpretation of it, but I think that you feel it and you're not sure what that feeling is. I would just slowly listen to it. And this is where I think writing becomes powerful. Go back to one of the original questions and where the breath becomes powerful, because you want to get all that energy into something outside of your mind. So writing typically articulates and manifests the future, which is what the feeling is. It's like a seed that got planted. And you can't take flight today. That's the time delay. You kind of talked about that earlier. Like I just call it the time delay. Like you're not going to get that 2015 thing every day. So you plant the seed, but the seed gets planted with or without you planting it. It's in all of us. It's there. And I think that's why writing and being in nature and doing these things and being holistic and being connected to self is so powerful, because consciousness has this ability to project the future and influence our behaviors. So that's where writing comes in, because it manifests itself through thinking. Now, what happens is that seed starts to develop roots, obviously, and it's going to birth itself. And when it births itself, that is the time where you know directly, in my experience, that the character you're currently playing has to die. And the fear of the unknown is too overwhelming now. And you have to take it. And in those moments, I think as you take flight more often in life, or you have, obviously, this is where history comes into play for your personal history and your personal knowledge and self-knowledge, self-control, these things, is that when you get into the unknown, for whatever reason, some mystical abyss of the universe, the cosmos, whatever you want to consider it, it gives you the tools that you need to get through the unknown. And you don't know that you have those tools, but that's the point of taking flight, is that you now learn the new toolbox. And from my vantage point, all the moments I've had in my life where I've taken flight, they've always been unbelievably terrifyingly scary. And for whatever reason, God has given me the tools. And I don't know how that happens, but they happen. And I don't care to try to figure out how it happens. I just am grateful to be able to take flight.
There it is, in his words, Harvey Martin. Thanks for joining us today, Harvey.
Cheers, brother.
All right. Stay tuned for the next episode coming up in a few more weeks. Take flight.